Hello BookTube. Today I'm going to be doing my reaction video to the results of the first round of the BookTube prize. Earlier today, Robert of Barter Hordes announced the results of the Octofinals, the group of 8 books in nonfiction and fiction. I was a judge for Group C, and this video will be my reaction, review, and ranking of the 6 books in Group C. So, before I begin, I have to admit that I had issues with all of these books. None of them were spectacular. All of them had flaws or issues, whether in general or that set me off. So, yeah, these reviews are probably going to be generally more on the negative side than I would have liked. But let's get started. So coming in at number 6 is Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America by Ijeoma Oluo. I've often described this book as white men behaving badly and getting away with it. And that's not necessarily what the thesis aims at. The book, I think, tries to be about how white patriarchy, through the creation of white privilege and white male privilege, creates a situation, a state of being in which basically social progress is lessened. That a mediocre state of being is settled for rather than something greater. Oluo kind of spends quite a bit of time in the introduction sort of conceptualizing her understanding, her usage of the term mediocre to equate to a sort of satisfaction with the status quo. The rest of the book, the sort of the support for the thesis is more white men behaving badly and for the most part getting away with it through personal anecdotes as well as through historical anecdotes. And I don't think the supporting chapters really support the thesis. And compounding things is I didn't think the writing was all that great. So Mediocre ended up being number 6. Coming in at number 5, is What is the Grass by Mark Doty. This is a memoir of Walt Whitman's influence on Mark Doty as a poet. And while the language is poetic, as one would expect from Mark Doty, he is a major poet, the organization of the memoir, I thought was a bit jumpy. There would be one scene, Doty in a Walt Whitman museum, and then jumping to imagining Walt Whitman walking down New York, streets of New York in the 1840s, I think is when he would have been there, to him at a writer's workshop. It was too confused, too muddied, I thought, and also rather disappointing. I was actually looking forward to reading What is the Grass, and quite disappointed. Coming in at number 4 is Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. This is a book about the Galvin family, of whom half of the children developed schizophrenia or similar mental illnesses. And the book goes over the family situation, gives a pretty much not quite day by day, but an in-depth look at how each of the sons of the Galvin family developed their mental illness over years and decades. I gave it number 4 largely because the even chapters have are pretty much take you out of the narrative, out of the story of the Galvin family, and focus more on the history of and the study of schizophrenia, the sort of kind of how the mental illness was first thought of, its first treatments, and moving on. And either it should have been an introductory essay, like a brief history of schizophrenia, or an appendix essay, or inserted as needed within the text when the Galvin boys were first confronted with the mental health authorities, their doctors, and sort of mental health professionals. So coming in at number 3 is The Dragons, the Giant, the Women by Wayetu. This is her memoir of her family's escape from Liberia, her years or decades as a refugee in the United States, and then her return to Liberia. And I like parts of this memoir quite a lot, and parts of it I didn't particularly care for. I thought the memoir was maybe a bit too busy, which does seem to be a recurrent theme of a lot of the memoirs I've been reading. But also, I'm not entirely sure about telling the part of the family's escape from Liberia in the early 90s from her 5-year-old, I think it's about 5 or 6-year-old self's point of view. I wasn't entirely too sure about that. I mean, on one level it is quite affecting. On the other level, it sort of obscures a lot of what was going on in Liberia at the time. And I thought that was a bit of a shame. Coming in at number 2 is Agent Sonia by Ben McIntyre. This is a targeted biography of Ursula Kaczynski, who was arguably the most successful Soviet agent Stalin had during World War II. She was instrumental in setting up the network that eventually led to the Soviet Union detonating an atomic bomb of their own. And I quite liked the book. It was exciting. It read like a thriller. My main issue with the book is that the story ends with Ursula returning to East Germany before she could be arrested. But the thing is she had 50 years of life left. Ursula did not die until I think 2000. So there's 50 years of her life that was covered in a chapter, in the lives of her children and her surviving relatives. I mean, that was quite disappointing. I mean, of course, it's always a problem with these targeted biographies is there's a certain point of the subject's life that's interesting, and then the rest of their life is glossed over, unfortunately. Because particularly in this case where I think I've read, there were some questions of whether or not she necessarily left the spy game after her return to East Germany. So, anyway. Now, coming in at number 1 is A Square Haunting, 5 Writers in London Between the Wars by Francesca Wade. This is a group biography of 5 women writers: H.D., Hilda Doolittle, Dorothy L. Sayers, Jane Harrison, Eileen Power, and Virginia Woolf, who all lived in Mecklenburg Square between 1917, when H.D. moved into a flat, to 1940, when Virginia Woolf briefly lived there at the start of World War II. And the book gives a look at how living on Mecklenburg Square, in Mecklenburg Square, affected each woman as a writer, as well as themselves individually. And I quite like the book. The writing's really good. It has by far the best writing of the 6 books in this section, or this group. And I think there were a lot of really fascinating elements, particularly with Dorothy L. Sayers. I thought her chapter was amazing. The Jane Harrison and Eileen Power chapters were brilliant. I love them. By far the best parts of the book. I do have some criticisms of the book. I'm not entirely sure Wade necessarily pulls everything together, and I was kind of getting a bit annoyed or tired with by the time Virginia Woolf came around, because she does appear quite a lot throughout the rest of the book. While she only lived in Mecklenburg Square for a brief period of time in the late 30s and early 40, she knew a lot of the other women, so she was a constant presence throughout a lot of the book. So that was my number 1. Again, I wish I could say more. I wish I had loved a lot of these books far more, well, at all. So this run of the BookTube Prize was a bit of a downer for me, and hopefully round 2, the quarterfinals will be much better, but we shall see. And I will make that video when we get to it at the end of May. So until then, BookTube, thank you, and have a great afternoon, and stay safe.